All right. I think I'll just go ahead and get started. I'll kind of introduce the event and just talk a little bit about what brought me to this space and then introduce our amazing speakers. My name is Wilfred. I'm a member of Lausan, and welcome to this event, a really special event, Sex Work Beyond Borders, talking about coalition building and transnational solidarity. And just thank you for joining during this really difficult week. I know it's been an intense week for me, and I'm sure it's been hard for a lot of people on different levels. So it really means a lot that we get to share this space at this time. And I've never been part of a discussion that was able to cross borders and talk about this, so I'm really excited. And we have a little description on the the website about why we are doing this event. But personally, I actually met Kin, who's one of our speakers in Hong Kong in 2016. And that was my first look inside Hong Kong's criminal justice system, which was really through the eyes of transgender sex workers. And, I remember sitting in High Court, Hong Kong's High Court with Kin and other members of Midnight Blue, which is Hong Kong's NGO for trans and gay sex workers, to try to defend, the defend against a denial of hormone therapy for a migrant sex worker who was at that time incarcerated in solitary confinement in Hong Kong. And then when I moved to New York 2 years ago, I became a food delivery worker, started to understand what it means to be a precaritized worker, in the margins, whose body is constantly policed and treated as disposable. But it was at that time that I first connected with Kate and Red Canary, who I'm also very honored to share this space with today. And I found out about their work through a really powerful article they published in Tits and Sass after the police killing of Yang Song, which called the piece was called "The Massage Parlor Means Survival Here," and it drew a link between the massage parlor, between the massage workers Flushing to China's hukou system, which restricts hundreds of millions of Chinese people to the rural areas where they're born, which means that sex workers who are working in the cities basically have no rights, they're disenfranchised, they have no protection. And it's one of the reasons why you have migrant sex workers and massage workers in a place like Queens. And so in 2018, Kim told me about a protest that Midnight Blue did in front of the US consulate in Hong Kong against SESTA and FOSTA. As we know, the so-called anti-sex trafficking legislation passed by the Trump administration that has criminalized so many of the websites that sex workers in Hong Kong were actually relying on to stay safe as well. And that to me was this perfect example of why we need this transnational solidarity between workers and how these state violences are actually so deeply interlinked. So there's a lot to talk about, especially in the context of these ongoing movements against police violence in Hong Kong and here and other countries around the world as we speak. But as we also know, long before these movements, sex workers were already on the front lines, offering the sharpest critiques of state violence, developing practices of mutual aid that a lot of the rest of us are only now starting to see and value. But even so, sex workers are still marginalized, even within these movements, remain vulnerable. So I know that I owe a great debt to sex workers and allies and the activists in this room for my own understanding of politics and myself. And so I just want to thank you all for being here and sharing the space. So I just want to quickly introduce who's in the who are our speakers tonight. So we have Kate from Red Canary, which is an organization based in New York City. We have Kin, as I mentioned, from Midnight Blue in Hong Kong. We have Akinos from the Black Sex Workers Collective. We have Elaine Lam from Butterfly, and we have Saye from the Black Youth Project. So I'm really excited to see, the connections that we can make tonight and the different discussions that we can have. And with that, I'll actually just throw it to the speakers who will introduce themselves for about 5 minutes each. Talk about your work, kind of what you're hoping to get out of the space tonight, And then we'll open it up to a Q&A, which will be moderated by members of Lausan here as well. And just before we get going, just a quick community guidelines. This is a safe space for collaboration, learning, critique, upon an ethic of care. And we reject all these ideologies of dehumanization, including but not limited to sexism, racism, nativism, classism, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, and ageism. And we try to resolve conflicts that may arise by searching for constructive and restorative solutions. But if there are people who are being persistently disruptive, we will, remove that person from the group. And just remember that we're going to be talking about a lot of topics that may require trigger warnings or content warnings. So assume that we're all trying to come in good faith, be respectful, learn to, step up, step back, and observe those kinds of dynamics. And last thing is that we will be recording this talk. Everyone is on mute except for the speakers. But if there are concerns about that, definitely feel free to message myself or one of the organizers privately. But just a fair warning that this talk will be recorded and it will be going for about 90 minutes. So I'll pass it to Kate to give the first introduction.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this. Wilfred, Promise, folks at Lausan Collective, and also thank you so much, Saye, Akinos, for coming on here in solidarity. Really, really appreciate you both for being present in this space in this moment. It means a lot for us to build together in this transnational format, as well as I think this attempt to really understand what it means to build solidarity as sex workers of color within North America. A little bit of history about us. Oh, I also want to say thank you to Esther, who put so much work into organizing this, and to everyone at Red Canary. I know Yin is on this call. I'm actually speaking on behalf of Kakoi, who was going to be speaking, but she's currently in her home country in the Philippines and isn't sure about connection. So I'm gonna, I think she would be a much better speaker on this, but I will share some of my thoughts in our organizing. We were started at the end of 2017 or early 2018, and some of the early organizing wasn't actually even done by folks like within Red Canary right now. I want to honor Rich Schultz, who did so much amazing work, and Melissa Jura-Grant, who had written a lot of articles about a massage worker, Song Yang, who died on 40th Road in Flushing during a raid on her workplace after she had reported being forced to give oral sex at gunpoint to an undercover cop. As a result of her calling out this cop and daring to actually go forward and seek justice, her death was a direct result of those actions. And so a lot of the early organizing around justice for Yang Song led to the formation of our group, Red Canary. And I actually reached out to Eileen at the very beginning of this because I was living in Toronto beforehand and had volunteered with Butterfly and learned so much from Eileen Lam. I was also on the board of Maggie's and was on the board of the Chinese Canadian National Council. And so a lot of the sort of sex worker rights organizing in Toronto is also like very dear to me, and making those connections. We actually were originally going to try to call Red Canary Butterfly New York, but it seemed like it wouldn't be good to make such a close association. So Red Canary was kind of formed out of a lot of knowledge that was gotten from the amazing work that Eileen has done after, being an organizer in Hong Kong for over 10 years with Ziten, and bringing over that body of knowledge to Toronto. And in some ways, that is also a migration pattern that has led to our organizing in Flushing, New York. I also think a lot of our perspective and our grounding framework on social justice has to be credited to Andrea Ritchie. She's been incredibly formative for me, like in terms of my thinking on social justice. I interned for her in 2010 to 2012 with Streetwise and Safe. And it was incredibly important because I think the sex worker movement at that time didn't have such a good lens in terms of state violence, police violence, and in terms of the importance of highlighting Black and Brown and trans folks and the ways that they've been impacted impacted by the criminal justice system in the United States. And so I think interning at Streetwise and Safe, working with Andrew Ritchie, and learning from groups and literature like from Insight has really shaped the kind of discourse that Red Canary holds right now, and where we prioritize our alliances, where we hold our values, and who we choose to organize with. And with that, I want to again thank Aquinos. I know Aquinos from so long ago. I think I was part of SWAP since like 2007, SWAP NYC. So I've known Aquinos, I think, for like over a decade, and it's really great to to have this like continual community here. And with Red Canary, when we started, we were both trying to continue the work of migrant sex worker organizing that has happened in Toronto, in New York City, and also we were following a bigger movement that was being led by multiple coalitions that had been doing this work for a very long time. And the formation at that time in 2019 was Decrim New York, which is the first statewide campaign to try to decriminalize sex work and pass the SBSTA for stopping violence against stopping violence in the sex trades. I want to thank Saye Joseph and all of her work, at Brooklyn Defenders and now at BYP 100 for really taking a lot of like core leadership in the steering committee for Decrim New York. I think what rushed Red Canary forward in a lot of our organizing, making us focus a lot more on campaigns in these initial years than we would have otherwise. Most organizations take quite a few years to just do base building first and to work with migrants before we jump on these big campaigns. But we were formed at a moment when Decrim New York, which seemed like a historic event, was kicking off. And so we joined on and we did everything we could to keep, to pull our weight in that fight. And so I think what you see here with Red Canary is as much a organization, that is based on migrant sex worker rights from the vocabulary that has been lent to us from Butterfly, as it is also a collective of Asian American artists who are in sex work, who are doing activism, who are also, kind of discovering what it means to be Asian American and organizers at the same time as, how sex work and the history of whorephobia and xenophobia in the history of the United States lends a particular experience and stereotypes around the Asian sex worker. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's here on this panel, and thank you again to Lausan for all the work that you've done to put this together.
Thanks so much, Kate. And I'll pass it over to Kin.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Kin from Midnight Brood. Midnight Brood is an organization in Hong Kong, and then we support male and transgender sex worker since 2006. And thank you very much for Lausan to organize this event. And actually, I'm really thanks for Promise to do my translator. He's on my phone. So actually, please forgive me. I didn't speak in English in the webinar very often. So I can, if there's any question, please stop me or ask me. And then I work in Midnight Blue since 2015. So it's 4.5 years now. And then actually, Midnight Blue is, I believe that Midnight Blue is the organization only focused on male and transgender sex worker. So a lot of experience that some female sex worker in Hong Kong may face, especially about the police violence or other inhuman torture, something like that by the police. We do not have a lot of experience to tell that. But in fact, in Hong Kong, male sex worker is not a very large population. Also including transgender sex worker in Hong Kong is not a very large population in Hong Kong. So that the police usually not do a lot of action on this community. But I can say today, I think we are focusing on two things, maybe about the situation in Hong Kong. Actually, most of the sex worker in Hong Kong we are doing outreach and we contact with are from mainland China. It's the largest community in Hong Kong from mainland China. And then also there are some local sex workers in Hong Kong, and the transgender sex worker in Hong Kong we face usually from the Philippines, Thailand, or other Asian country. So that if we are talking about maybe the racism, I am not sure I can talk about much about racism at this moment, but I can say that the conflict between the migrant sex worker and the police is always serious. Especially the Hong Kong police will do a lot of action to arrest the migrant sex worker in Hong Kong because they do not have the identity card. They cannot work legally in Hong Kong. And therefore, we found that before the police also will have the similar cases that just like to having the free sex from the sex worker during the undercover action. And then I believe that we followed the case is from Korea just 2 years ago. And also is a migrant sex worker in Hong Kong. And then she claimed that under the undercover action by the police, she provided free sex to the police officer. And then she's very brave to say it in the court. But actually in Hong Kong, if you have to say that the police is doing something bad to you, you have to be the witness, you have to stay in Hong Kong. But most of the migrant sex workers who get arrested, they will send back to their home country. Therefore, they do not have the chance to be the witness to on the court to say that the police is doing something wrong. So it's very difficult to arrest any police who across the boundary. So Midnight Blue is a very special organization, I believe that, because we focus a lot in LGBTQI plus events or issues in Hong Kong, and which maybe the other organization in Hong Kong more focus on the female sex worker. Maybe they do not have that experience like us. So because I think that we want to talk about to collect other movement or other social movement. Just like Midnight Blue will have a lot of experience that to collect with other organizations concerning LGBTQ rights. Just like previously, we found that a lot of transgender prisoners in Hong Kong, they are undergoing inhuman treatment. For example, they will cut their hair, even though their gender identity is female, and then they will have solitary confinement. They cannot get hormones. Therefore, we have a coalition with some transgender organization in Hong Kong, and then we fight for better treatment for the transgender prisoner. I believe that Wilfred have a lot of effort on it because there is a JR, the judicial review case in Hong Kong, and then Wilfred help us to translate or to follow up the legal cases. and also recently we initiate an LGBTQI media guide for the Hong Kong media, because we found that the Hong Kong media have a lot of discriminative article against sex workers and LGBTI community. And then we initiate the media guide, and we collect with a lot of different organizations concerning different LGBTI issues, so that we have a lot of effort on LGBT issue. And also I think the resources of some sex worker organization can support other LGBT organizations is that we have a lot of experience about criminal cases, or we know how to deal with the police, deal with the legal system. Maybe that is some resources, maybe other organization concerning about LGBT issue may lack of. And we can just provide some support or resources for them. And then I think that let's see, the relationship between the migrant sex worker and the local sex worker is one of the difficulty when we are doing our work, because usually the local sex worker believes that the migrant sex worker will decrease their price in the market, and a large number of them increasing the competition, just like that. And usually we want to collect or to mobilize the migrant sex worker and to make a better relationship between the local and the migrant, but it's not easy. Especially the migrant in Hong Kong, they will only stay for 1 week to 1 month, and we cannot keep a long collection with them. So it's our difficulties, I believe that. And okay, that's it.
Thank you, Ken. Really appreciate that. And just to everyone watching, you know, we're gonna go to a Q&A after we introduce the speakers. So, you know, you can feel free to think of anything that comes to mind. And I'd like to now pass it to Akinos from the Black Sex Workers Collective. Oh.
Sorry, it wasn't allowing me to unmute myself.
Sorry about that.
No problem. All right, it's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Thank you so much.
In Germany. I'm exhausted. I was working on my school paper, and I hope to stay awake. It's not, I was drinking coffee, so I'm like hoping that it works, but I don't think it will because I'm tired. But before I start, I just want to be like, I was going to tell SX Noir, girl, you're giving me too much space right now. Look at her. Look at SX face. She can't even hear me. Whatever. She's like giving me all the face right now, and I can't stop looking at her. Anyway, thank you all so much for organizing this, and it's nice to see Kate again. I haven't seen Kate in like several years, and yeah, we were there together at Swap and Swank, and now here we are. She's just now seeing it. Oh my God, because she's watching on Facebook, so there's a delay. Okay, I see. Anyway, we were there with Swap and Swank, and that's kind of where the Black Sex Worker Collective started. It would have officially started in 2018, but it started when the idea started coming to me when I was at Swap and Swank, because there was a lot of lack of representation for Black and brown sex workers that I saw. And additionally, when I was trying to kind of take the lead in, you know, for that sector of the sex worker outreach project, I was denied that access by someone. I was denied that access by someone. So not too long after that happened, Swap and Swank was no more, and I kind of just went about my business and kept organizing with like best practices policy projects, working with Desiree Alliance, which had the only international sex worker conference, and with the Outlaw Project when they started, and New Jersey Red Umbrella Alliance, all of whom are like coalition members and that I work with today. So a lot of the organizing work that I was doing was with whatever they were doing. And then in 2018, FOSTA SESTA would happen. And, you know, BSWC had a lot of false starts. Like I wanted to start it because there was and when it comes to like Black people and racism and whorephobia, there's always something happening. So there was a lot of incidents that were taking place that were like really headline news, where I wanted to start it, but it just never happened. And then FOSTA SESTA happened, and it was just like, okay, there's nothing I could do now. If I don't do it now, it's never gonna happen. So it turned out to be the perfect time, because when that happened, and you know, I had written some pieces, so then like the Root and Jezebel came in and did a piece, which really kind of helped us to take off, because we did this interview with Kyan from Glitz, And it really helped us to kind of solidify ourselves. So it really started as a response to the SESTA FOSTA legislation, because I was wondering, what in the world are these Black sex workers going to do now that the main platform is, is gone? What is everyone going to do? Street-based work is not for everyone. So what were we going to do? So I started it in the hopes that I could get the funding to support the community, trying to do legislation, trying to offer, a little financial support, emotional support, and so on. So one of the biggest supporters is my whore mother, PJ Starr, and she's a mentor of the BSWC, and a lot of the stuff that has happened with us, I owe that to her as, an ally, and an amazing, should be award-winning filmmaker. I think she's on here somewhere, but I can't see her. Amazing filmmaker. She did the No Humans Involved and some other films that, I'll tell you more later, and then you'll be able to get familiar with her work. Anyway, I owe a lot of the stuff to her because it's a lot of back and forth with her, where a lot of ideas came to be, a lot of support happened, for my ideas. Writing the grants, BSWC really owes it to her for a lot of the grants that are written and the funding that we get. She writes all of our grants. I'm not doing that shit. I'm not. Like, that's a specialized skill, and I ain't got it. So she does it. So a lot of it's owed to her. Anyway, we are here. I have left New York because why would I stay there? I left New York and hit the road we're in 2020. So I just got to Berlin in July of last year. I landed in July. So I left New York at the top of 2019, and just hit the road and decided, because things were not working out there, let me go figure out where I can migrate, where I can live. And one of the places I went to was Hong Kong, and I did not get a chance to meet anyone from Midnight Blue. I emailed and I was like, what's going on? And I think a lot was happening. Actually, I got there smack dead in the middle of the beginning of the protest. So things were a little crazy. So it was very difficult to meet anyone in Hong Kong. I went to one organization which was not sex worker led, and I hated them. I can't remember their name because, when spaces are sex worker led, there's a whole different energy. How we treat each other is completely different, and this organization was clearly not sex worker led. I'm sorry if you're here. I hated it. It was just too non-sex worker friendly, but whatever. I did get a chance to, be there and, at least get an idea of how if spaces work. But I think it's very important that spaces where they're treating sex workers, the sex workers really need to be in those leading positions, because there's nothing like it, especially when you're touring like I was, then finding that space where the sex workers lead it, because it's a whole different relationship. So anywho, I did go there, and I did not get a chance to meet any of you, but maybe next time if I ever come back. I did like Hong Kong. And by the way, I'm just gonna sidebar, for the research that I'm doing for school has everything to do with this migration and worker solidarity. And it also happens to be the event that we are doing on July 22nd, which I'll get to in just a minute. So nobody knows this, and I really don't say it because I have no real connection to it, but nobody knows this, but I'm like 25% Chinese, right? My dad is like half Chinese. So I was reading about, I think the name of the sex worker is it Ah Toy? I don't know if I'm saying that name right, but she was kind of like legendary in San Francisco sex worker rights, actually, like this as a sex worker, and was pretty famous. And whatever, misogyny tried to destroy her. And I just want to acknowledge that, Asian people have a really solid foundation in sex worker rights, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. All right, back to Black Sex Worker Collective. Okay, so I left, went on tour, went to New Zealand, went to Hong Kong, went to Australia, trying to figure out all these places that I can migrate and do the work, but Berlin chose me. So Berlin is where I am now. We're trying to build a Berlin branch here, and also some other branches in the US, as people are like messaging me and trying to start their own BSWC in their part of town, which is great because it's absolutely needed. No shade to swap, but you know, Black sex workers and sex workers of color could definitely hop on to our narrative, which is quite, I'm reclaiming the word radical, which is quite radical, non-conforming, just really totally left, raw, non-respectability politics shit. Because that's, if you know me, which a lot of you don't, just follow me on social media, you will understand I am that person. So that's the kind of space that I want to create. July 22nd, we have, I don't know why the hell I mean, I know why I did it, but now I'm regretting it. We have this 22-hour event that I batshit crazy, and I cannot believe PJ did not stop me to do a 22-hour like non-stop online conference, but it's really my birthday party. It's my 43rd birthday party. To just present work. It's really about worker solidarity. It's not a sex worker event, it's a worker solidarity event where we're trying to, you know, bridge the gap between what people think is work and what people think is sex, bring that together, because the labor movement, what COVID-19 did is really expose just how much the government really does not give a damn about you unless you're rich or unless you're like kind of playing into their system in some way. So it exposed that. So a lot of people are, you know, the light is coming to a lot of people and they're realizing that they have a lot of connection when it comes to labor. And sex worker rights to me is never just about sex worker rights. It is a labor violation. Like all the laws and regulations that are forced on sex workers is really about labor violation and, you know, not giving people the right to use their energy and their bodies how they want. And that's definitely not an isolated issue from anything else. So, you know, we're here for that event, 22 hours, people doing different things from art, and there's some seminars and things like that, and screenings that's going to be happening. And I hope people can attend because it's only $22. And we're trying to raise $43,000. And that money is basically to try and get us to have some operating costs, as well as to have money to give to the community. And while we are based in the US, so to speak, we definitely do sex workers from different countries. Like one sex worker today from Colombia, I had to send some emergency funds to her. We do try to support sex workers from all over the globe, but we are really like European and mainly US based. So that's what we've got going on. There's more, but I'm sure folks will ask questions. I don't want to take up any more time. I think the coffee is kicking in, so let's do this, because when it kicks out, it kicks out. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Next, I'd like to pass it to Eileen from Butterfly.
Hi everyone, I'm so excited. And I think it's really, really great to hear other speakers to talk about how different organizations develop, and it's also important to have like sex worker. This is the platform that can come together to build the solidarity. Thank you for Lausan for the hard work to bring people together and organize this meeting. So it's very interesting because I just realized, oh, I have not talked about history of Butterfly for a while. So this is the 5th year anniversary of Butterfly. Suppose we will have a birthday party, but because of the COVID, we try to postpone it. And as Kay said, before I moved to Canada, I have involved in the sex worker movement for 10 years in Hong Kong. So great to see the friends from Midnight Blue, because when I work in the sex worker organization in Hong Kong, we found that this is very important to have different projects to create a space for sex worker to be self-organized, because like there is a lot of diversity of the sex worker. And I think this is so important to have male and trans sex worker being organized. And I think this is so great. So when I moved to Canada, actually, it is the moment that sex worker movement in Canada was very, very organized. Particularly, they have just won the case that they challenge they sue the government because the criminal law actually makes sex worker become more dangerous, and the Supreme Court have the judgment say it is unconstitutional to like not allow the sex worker to work together, and so and it's amazing. Everyone is celebrating. and many places have different sex worker organized, but it's very, for me, is quite, I feel quite strange. One side, on the one hand, is really great because of the court case, that the police supposed not raiding the sex worker, not arrest the sex worker because everyone is waiting. This is what I heard from the sex worker organization. Majority of them is white sex worker. But when I work with the Asian sex worker, we hear the very different story. Even they say they don't enforce the criminal law, so that the Asian women, particularly from Hong Kong and China and Taiwan and Korean, they are still being arrested, detained, and deported. So it's very important to know what's happened. So because it's just so powerful, actually the anti-sex worker group, anti-trafficking group, we don't call them abolitionists because they are not real abolitionists, because they're pro-police, pro-law enforcement. So the anti-sex worker group, actually they take advantage of the sex worker, they are not self-organized. So that particularly they are successful to use the victim discourse, the victim label to support the movement. So, and because of many white sex workers are organized, they are not successful to impose that label. So, but for Asian sex worker, they are being labeled as victim, indigenous sex worker, and youth sex worker. They are the group being labeled as traffic victim and continues being raped and arrested and detained and deported by the police. So, and so that's why I start working with the community again in Canada, particularly why Butterfly was formed, because at that time I was working with a community organization to do some outreach in massage parlor. And so when I lock the door, I say, "Oh, hi, how are you?" And then the people hear, "Oh, are you Elaine?" And then they rush to open the door and say, "Oh, do you remember me?" So, and then they keep asking, is it any sex worker organization they can join? Is it any sex worker organization they can complain about the police? But it's nothing, because they don't feel that they can connect to the local sex worker group because of the language barrier, because of different need. So, and then they say, so why we start the sex worker organization? So that is the reason that I met some of the organization, some of the workers, they have engaged in the sex worker organization when I was in Hong Kong before, so that they work with me and then start the organization. So sex worker organization, Butterfly is a grassroots organization. We position ourselves as grassroots, and that is what I learned from the sex worker movement in Hong Kong also. So we use a labor organizing model. It's very, very important to mobilize the community, because I think also the other thing, I come to Canada, I found when there is meeting of the sex worker, is so many sex worker actually is PhD student, master student, but there is also a lot of sex workers, they are on the ground, but they are more using the social service program instead of they are building the leadership, building the power. So, and I don't say is none, but I mean that is something is, we really see that is really, really important to have the bottom-up approach, that how to mobilize the community, how to help the community to build the leadership, build the power, and also know about the rights, and also know about the problem, because they know the best, but they need the tools, right? So that's why Butterfly keep doing different parts. One, we continues doing a 24/7 hotline, and then we do outreach, we deliver the information, we translate all the law into Chinese so that they can understand the law, they can understand the rights, and we did offer different training. English is sexy language, so it's not only learn about English, but actually it's learn about how you can negotiate with law enforcement. So, and so we work with the people in hotel, in apartment, and also massage parlor. And I think same as in US and many places, massage parlor has been targeted last few years, particularly because they are run by Asian. So the anti-sex worker group, they could not find victim to rescue, so that there is the population, they think that they can, put their violence against them to take away the job. So, and it's also happened in Toronto. So in the last few years, there is a lot of abuse by law enforcement and police. So for example, they will ask the woman to take off the clothes, and then, so that is something when I was in Hong Kong, I think, oh, so the Hong Kong police is very bad. It's always asked for the free sexual service and take money from the sex worker, abuse the sex worker. And I imagine come to Canada, it will be different, but it's no different. all the police is the same all over the world. So, and then the story is still the same. So, and last year, particularly, the city is proposing shut down the massage parlor so that we organized 300 workers. So went to the city hall to stop it. They were able to stop it, not completely eliminate the proposal, but at least make them take a break. And I think this is very important, that to make the people, policymaker and the anti-sex worker people know that the Asian sex worker actually have the voices, so that they are still voice out. They say we are not the victim. So we are having our agency. So I think this is very, very important. And this is also the direction we keep doing, that how to support the workers. So recently of the COVID, most of the workers also left behind from any government relief or support. And so that, and also we also work with a lot of people without status, so that there were also 80 workers also mobilized to, including massage parlor and sex worker, because of the stigma, not all the people identify as the sex worker, so that we also respect how they identify themselves. We understand this is something we need to move on to really change the stigma of the sex worker, make people more comfortable to identify as sex worker. But I think this is the stage, like people identify as massage parlor worker or sex worker all come together to fight for the status, so that they call the PM like just Trudeau. So Trudeau in Mandarin mean potato, so that we have the campaign all call potato and tell them the Mandarin. So status for all. 我要有身份. So that is something that we keep doing, and then we also fight against the police abuse. So that is so that's what Butterfly doing is different level. One is the grassroots organizing, capacity building. We also have a lot of training, meeting, but also we do a lot of advocacy, because the fundamental problem is the law. Fundamental thing is the discrimination against sex workers. So that's why we keep doing and pushing and changing it. So, and this is long journey. It's not easy, but I think what we are doing in Butterfly is also not only fighting ourselves, but also build an allyship with different movements, so that we work with like other Asian group or racial justice group to fight for racial justice. We also work with other anti-policing group to fight together. We also work with other migrants group to fight the immigration rights together. And I think this is so important. We need to break the wall and work together. And I think that we may also see that sex worker community also is very divided, and also how sex worker is affected is very depends on the social location and also different background. So, but this is also the institution dividing us, right? So that it's dividing the community. So, and I think this is very important panel, and thank you for organizing it, how we can build the solidarity to have better understanding of the issue and struggle other sex workers are facing, but also learn from each other the power, how we can work together to make the change. And particularly in this moment, the people witness how much violence the policing it's always happened like this against racialized people, against Black people, against sex workers. So, but many people, they don't witness. And I think this moment have more people aware that, and also need to think about sex. Police is not the solution. The police always is the problem for many, many marginalized community. Instead of give the funding, instead of give the power to the police, that should give the power to the people, particular sex worker and other racialized and marginalized migrants. So I think this is so important. I'm so excited, and we keep learning, and so we hope that we can have like more chance to share and exchange. But really great to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Sae from the Black Youth Project's 100.
Hey y'all, I'm good. My camera is off because my internet is like wonky, so if you folks don't mind. So Sae, she, her, hers, with BYP 100, that stands for Black Youth Project 100. I've been working on Decrim NY and repealing the Walk and Walk trans ban. Kate, you gave me a little bit too much credit for Decrim NY and the bill, but yeah, we did work on introducing the Stop the Violence in the Sex Trade Act, and it was a super crucial moment because it happened within like a presidential cycle, and it was super dope to see candidates talk about decriminalization of sex work. So for me, my space within this larger conversation is just building within Black communities and Black spaces. I think even within Decrim there is space for critique, and critiquing in the ways in which the space upholds the white heteronormative perspective of the sex trade, and the ways in which that kind of doesn't really capture the experiences of Black women, Black femmes, Black trans folks within the sex trade. So that's kind of the work myself and folks like T.S. Candy has been really working through. So like when we talk to Black folks in the hood, Black folks in the hood don't call it sex work, right? Black folks in the hood call it hustlers, prostitutes, whores, and those are the types of language in which that we use. So how is that space disconnected from like Black folks, right? So we've really been having those deeper conversations with people in our hood who've had to do work in the underground economy to survive. Black folks have always had to do shit to survive, whether it's sex work, whether it's sell drugs, whether it's be street vendors. Capitalism has forced us into that space and into those economies in order to survive. And that has been one way in which, through organizing around decriminalizing sex work and really connecting it to the labor movement, like Akino's name, has been one way in which we've been able to like connect with Black folks who aren't in these spaces, who aren't in organizing spaces, who aren't in abolitionist spaces. Survival under capitalism has been one way in which we've been able to like connect with folks on this topic. Yeah, I don't have really much to say other than if people, I think I'll get to it once people ask questions. But I think for me, something I like find interesting about this sex work space is not only the language of like naming sex work, but also the ways in which the unit of analysis of like sex work tends to sometimes erase the experiences of Black trans folks who are sex workers, and the ways in which when we say sex work, people tend to assume that experiences of one sex worker is that of everybody, when it's different across racial, gender identities and migration identities. So I feel like that's like a tension we've been navigating within Decrim and like within the New York movement of like, yes, sex work is the thing we're trying to decriminalize, but each sex worker based on their racial identity has different experiences. And sometimes when we just use the broad term sex work, how that within itself could just center the experiences of white folks within the trade. So that's kind of another space in which we've been struggling through and talking through. And just another conversation is like, one, acknowledging the fact that Black women in general have been sexualized throughout their history in this country, and the ways in which when we talk about sex work and we talk about the trade, why it feels so connected to why it feels so connected to trafficking, because Black women, Black bodies have been sexualized from like being a young kid. Like my body was sexualized at the young age of like 8 years old. So those conversations are so intertwined for us in those spaces. Yeah, so those kind of like mostly the work I've been doing in the conversations I have with like Black folks in this like larger space of like decriminalizing sex work, but also dismantling capitalism. And yes, I do policy, but I also want to be clear that policy cannot liberate us. Yes, policy could help to remove like the burden of the system off our necks, but it won't liberate us. It is just a small tool and aspect of this work. But yeah, super excited to hear questions and like vote with y'all.
Thank you so much. I am learning so much from all y'all, and this is a good time for anyone to start putting questions into the chat. So I just have one question just to start off, and this is a question for all the speakers, and kind of inspired by Saye, what you were just talking about with the terminology around the phrase sex work. I know this is like there are different approaches to this, probably in all of the spaces that these speakers are a part of. So I know that, for, Red Canary, we've talked about different screen massage workers and sex workers, and how we can't just sort of like combine those two. And so I just want to throw it out to the speakers and talk about what the difficulties are and with terminology across even languages, and the things that you find yourself having to navigate and remind people of over and over. So maybe let's just start with Eileen.
So I think this is a lot of tension, particularly as other folks have said that there is very diverse of the sex worker community, right? So that I think this is also, this term also have a particularly historical and political reason to develop this term. But I think not, but people with different background may have different exposure of those ideas, right? So, and the other part is we also see there is the great tension between the people who work in massage parlor and before also people work as escort, and also a lot of actors, they may, you know, like also work as sex workers. So sometimes we also say marriage is also sex work, right? It's like wholesale instead of like retail. So, and I think because of the stigma, is also make many people is not able to take that identity this way. So, and I think that is something we need to keep doing, no matter how people take up the terms. But I think that we need to eliminate the stigma so that the people do not have the because now we found why people don't want to identify as a sex worker. It's not because they are not doing sex work or they devalue the work, but it's because when they take up this name, they also take up the stigma and they take up the pressure and also take up all the risks they face in real life. So I think that is very important to eliminate that. So it's also happened in strip club and also like in other type of sex work setting. So I think this is, we also working very hard. Is we have a lot of pushback, but I think gradually now, particularly after the COVID-19, people work together, we find like more people who are in massage parlor feel more comfortable, identify themselves as sex worker. So, but I think we also need to acknowledge that there is like a lot of historical, political reason to develop this term, and then how to help particularly grassroots community to get that information in the way that and also that how to create a space different people can feel comfortable with their own identity. So I think most important is not the name, but why we also use sex worker, because there is the very important political reason that this sex work is work. So we call it sex worker. But then is it, this is only name we need to use? We may not think so. And then so that, and also really think it's important sex worker is not one thing, right? Sex worker is very, very diverse individual come together. So, and always need to acknowledge that. So yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So it's, yeah.
Akinos, I wanted to throw it to you and see if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I wanted to say to Saeed, thank you so much for making me realize why I use terms like whore. I love that word. It makes me feel so good inside. I guess it must be a historical thing, you know, a cultural thing that I didn't even realize until like that moment. I was like, oh, okay, that all makes sense. You know, I'm from Brooklyn. That's where I grew up. I came from the slums of Jamaica, West Indies, and moved to the slums of Brooklyn. And so that language is pretty much embedded into my vocabulary, and I embrace it. Sex worker is cool, you know, it's a very politically correct term to use. It's a good umbrella term, but I wish we lived in this free world where I could just be like, it's the Black Whore Collective. You know, we can't do that. We just can't do stuff like that. But yeah, you know, I really don't have much to say on this. This is our language, and I totally agree that, you know, once you hear the word sex worker, it kind of either people just think that you're a prostitute, which is really interesting, or they think you're a rich prostitute, which, you know, they've watched too much Pretty Woman in their lives. So they don't really have much, their viewpoint on it is, you know, fairly narrow, but it does, you know, it does kind of evoke a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts, but none of them really are like, you know, kind of speaking to the history that Black people have presented in the sex worker community. But I mean, whatever. I don't really have much else to say on that. Then, yeah, those are our words, and yeah, I'm gonna patent it if I could.
Saya, do you have anything you want to add off of that?
Oh no, yeah, definitely agree with everything. I think for me it was like interesting to like see like white sex workers call themselves like hustlers, and to just think back to like Black communities and how we were like, how our communities were, our elders were like stigmatized for calling themselves hustlers, and now we're like in this new age of people like, I'm a hustler. I'm like, wait a minute, our Black folks were saying this and doing this in this way long before this. So yeah, definitely interesting to understand. Yes, for sure, there's like a history and politics behind coming to the word sex worker, and also it's interesting to see people still use and like almost co-opt the term hustler in like different spaces. But yeah, I think all these perspectives are super valid and real.
And Kin from Midnight Blue. I think you're on mute.
Okay. Actually, we will not use the word sex worker when we are contacting with our community. I believe that most of the community we are contacting with during outreach, they would like to use some. I have an idea. Will you, Wilfred? Can you translate my Chinese to English? It's very complicated to. Is it possible?
I'll try.
因為好多時都係會用一啲同按摩相關嘅字眼，譬如話技師，又或者係佢哋都避免用 sex worker 呢個字嘅，特別係佢哋想強調自己有一個按摩嘅技能，而好多時性工作只係其中一個佢哋會做嘅東西啫。佢唔係完全淨係做性工作嘅。咁對於好多 local 嘅，即係我哋接觸嘅 local 係會係咁。
Right. So the idea is that folks want to emphasize that they do massage work, and that sex work is only one part of what they're doing. And this is especially prevalent among local workers in Hong Kong. Yeah.
So I believe that the identity of a sex worker, the term is, we will use it for the public, for the political correct, but within the community, maybe they do not have that identity, and they will more prefer to show up their massage work, or they're only compensating dating some younger sex worker, and it's the case in the local. So in Hong Kong, we have some word is called 姐姐仔、哥哥仔，一啲比較間接嘅字眼，係去同佢哋溝通，去等佢哋容易啲接受呢一個身份咁樣。
Right. There are euphemisms like cis and little bro that will allow people to more easily accept these identities. Kate, do you want to develop those points?
Yeah, I'd like to add a few things from what Elise has said, in that definitely organizing within New York, you see that a lot of people don't take well to the term sex worker. I think what is different from how Red Canary started and how Butterfly started is that we didn't have those previous relationships from Hong Kong that we can lean on with the shared vocabulary around sex work already. Sex work is a political term and an umbrella term that encompasses so many different types of workers, from strippers to escorts to porn workers, and I think everyone is always simultaneously a sex worker and something else, whatever part of the sex industry that you're part of. For us in New York, my co-founder for Red Canary was is a woman who isn't even sure if she wants decrim, right? And this has been the real conflict, I think, with Red Canary from the start, and why it's been difficult to organize. I mean, she's somebody who chooses now to be in sex work given the limitation of other options, but when she came to this country, didn't initially want to be a sex worker, right? And felt like she was tricked into the sex industry because of the availability of newspaper ads. A lot of what is often talked about in the human trafficking movement really applies to her experience. And, the term sex worker is something completely alien to her, and she didn't identify with it. And the day-to-day resources that she needed and that she thinks the community needs are not related to like policy work or legal changes or decrim. It's much more day-to-day, like, can you help me answer, like we have a bill, I want to be able to see the hospital, but I don't understand what's written on this note. Like, how can I, right now with COVID-19, how can we make sure, like, what should we do about housing? Are we able to get, checks from the government? If my partner is a worker and has paid his taxes, does that mean we can get it? These are the sort of day-to-day things, and decrim is the furthest thing away from their minds, especially in a country that they're not invested in, that they may have to leave, and, that the policy changes may actually be detrimental in some ways to them, right? Like, there's fears that if sex work is decriminalized for citizens, what's going to happen to migrants who have depended on this source of income? Is it going to, cheapen the market? Is it going to, so these are all considerations, I think, that that muddy the line in our ideological frameworks around, trafficking versus sex work. And I think these are really important to talk about and to really delve into and organize from like the lived experiences of people who live in these sort of really, really difficult spaces in between our social justice vocabularies, right? I think Eileen's work has been so pivotal to this movement because it was a chance for people in the sex worker rights movement to challenge the human trafficking vocabulary that had so dominated this subject in this space for so long. And, a lot, for most of the 90s and early 2000s, people only heard about prostitution in terms of trafficking. And so, and the victims, the images that people had in mind were immigrant women, were Black women. And so this allowed for, migrant women to speak back. And it was such an incredible moment, I think, in our organizing. But also, I think it's important, like, for us to also complexify, like, all of our spaces, all of the ways in which we talk about people's lived experiences. It's always so in between. Like, we found that certain anti-trafficking organizations provide really needed resources for people on the ground in Flushing. And those are resources that we can't, as like a, collective of sex workers through mutual aid, we can't necessarily give all of those resources. And it's good that some resources are there. It's not good that those resources are tied to policing, right? And sometimes people who are experiencing, really, really difficult situations in sex work, have been abused, have been harassed, want to go to the police because, because that is still the person that this is still like the option that comes first to mind. Other times they don't want to go to the police, right? And I think it's been difficult because, working in these spaces, we have on one hand the need to try to fit things to a social justice vocabulary, an abolitionist vocabulary for police abolition, for prison abolition. And at the same time, we also need to serve the people that we're working with and whatever comes up for them and whatever language they use. And yeah, most of the time, it's not going to be about sex work. It's going to be some other thing. And everyone has so much so much internalized stigma. Massage workers actually really, really don't want to be in even the same room as street-based sex workers, right? It's a problem when we try to bring a meeting with folks together because they look down so much on people who are visible on the street, right? And, given these dynamics, like what are the sorts of solidarities that are concrete and that we can fight for together, specific conditions, specific asks? And what are the solidarities that come through our language, through our causes, through our policy campaigns that are actually not concrete or experienced by people on the ground that are still important and for the overall cultural picture and our overall battle are still like things that are definitely things we need to strive for, but that we also need to be wary of in day-to-day like organizing work as things that come from an external vocabulary.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's actually a great question just to pose to anyone who wants to answer. Kind of the question of what kind of solidarity are concrete. And it echoes a question that Aya dropped in the chat a couple minutes ago, which was just what alliances and partnerships are underrated or we would love to see more of in doing this work. We hear a lot about the importance of working alongside with the labor movement, but what are other ones that don't get enough attention? We've now made it so that anyone can unmute themselves. So feel free to just unmute. And even if you have a question, you're in the audience, you just want to kind of chime in, feel free. And yeah, I'll just kind of open up on that note to the question of what are the kinds of solidarity we want to see more of. Kin?
Yeah, I found that recently in Hong Kong, there is an issue about refugee or asylum seeker. It's, we found some sex worker, especially from other country, who stay in Hong Kong for a very long time. They are applying for asylum seeking and also for refugee identity in Hong Kong. But we found that we have to collect with other organizations who are especially focusing on refugee issue, so that because we lack of that experience, and then we hope that to have some collaboration with them. And then that's why I think it's one of the issue that for those non-local sex worker in Hong Kong is facing, because Hong Kong is not a place who is very easy to for the refugee. They cannot do any work. They cannot have enough subsidy for their life living. So it's very easy to choose sex work as one of their way to learn to earn living. So it's one of the population in Hong Kong. And then so the movement, for example, to urge the government to have a better welfare for the refugee, or to improve the situation in the immigration detention center, is one of our concern. And then we have some collective work with the refugee organization. Of course, we don't have a lot of experience how to do that, but we are learning from them.
Can I answer? Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So I don't know how I'm supposed to end it. So there, as far as I am concerned anyway, there is no, when it comes to sex worker rights, there's in activism, there is no separation of anything. Everything is literally connected to the sex worker movement, and sex workers are like low-hanging fruit, right? So we're like the easy target. And what I think the general population needs to recognize is that when the lowest of the population is getting mistreated, that, you know, you're not very far away from that. So what I would like to see as far as like collaboration is concerned in the movement is that we literally have to build alliance with everyone. So the labor unions is a piece in that I think is very interesting to read. I see Kate is like super quick with dropping the links in here. Let me see, it's in my tabs. It's police killings bring out tensions within the labor movement. And that was written on a site called theappeal.org. And what it highlights, you know, there is definitely how the labor unions do not want the cops to be a part of the union anymore, because the cops do not serve the community. They are not a part of the working class. They are part of the controlling and oppressive class, right? So we need to be connected to the labor movement. We need to be connected to immigration movements. We need to be connected to reproductive justice movements. We need to be connected to literally every movement where it's just the layman for himself. Additionally, it would be wonderful to just, because this business really affects women, like the femmes and trans people, right? So I think it would really be very good for, you know, sex worker rights, which is a human rights issue as well, right? To also be for just the regular women to be aligned with us, like by any means necessary. Like forget that, you know, as far as I'm concerned, if you're a woman, you've been a whore to somebody at some point. There's no escaping it. Even Michelle Obama was, you know, was berated, and she's Michelle Obama, right? So any woman, any femme, any trans person, at any time can just fall into the category of being a whore or being seen as a prostitute, or those words being used in a derogatory manner with them. So what I would love to see is that people stop trying to separate themselves from sex workers and recognize that this is like, our movement is a microcosm of what's really going on in the world. So lots of racism, housing discrimination, medical discrimination, and things like that. So we absolutely need to be connected with everyone that's not from the oppressive class in order to try to hopefully have a stronger voice.
I could also add my 2 cents. Definitely affirming everything that's been said already. Also, something I've just been coming to understand or like crave a lot more is like more Black solidarity. I think there's an assumption that because we're Black, we're in solidarity, and we're not. The sole foundation of white supremacy is to make sure that Blackness, we're not connected. In this sex work movement, just overall, I would love to see more Black solidarity across the spectrum of Blackness. So Black Americans and the Black diaspora, like Black migrants, Black migrants and Black Americans, there is a tension that we just, whew, Jesus. Black cis women and Black trans women, like more solidarity in this space, in that context. That's one space I think we definitely need solidarity. And to me, sometimes when I think about solidarity in like the racial lens of like people asking Black folks or wanting to be in solidarity with Black folks, the onus tends to always fall on Black people. And I think solidarity to me across racial lines look like people who aren't Black working, centering anti-Blackness and making sure that you're working not just through like an anti-racist lens or however you define it, but like centering anti-Blackness within your spaces and just overall. That's like one space I'm thinking about solidarity. And the next one is like, as Akinos was saying, just overall in the movement, sex workers been telling us about police violence and police harm. Like they've been critiquing the system. They've been telling us about state violence and police violence. And yet even in this moment in the US, it's still being left out. We're still centering the ways in which Black cis men experience police violence, or we're not centering and including the ways in which femmes and women experience police violence, so like sexual assault, direct harassment, like all of that should be included in our analysis if we're trying to like liberate everybody. And I think that requires across movements to be centering the experiences of sex workers, centering the experiences of Black cis women and Black trans women in their movements to actually get to that point and recognize it and hearing the impact in your analysis. But yeah.
Can I just say something really quick to Saeed's comment? Yes. Oh my God, yes. I just want to, just 2 points. I think I've already forgotten the second point because I'm that tired. But, you know, today I left a group today, an African women mothers in Deutschland group today, because when I tried to go in and have a conversation with them about not treating the homeless population as if they don't have a mind of their own, someone went to my page and saw that I had like the promo for my event coming up, and you know, was dismissing me because it was like, oh, you're advertising sex, which is ludicrous. Like if I want to advertise sex, I'm not going to do it on Facebook, right? But that's not what I'm doing. So anyway, I just wanted to say that it's so real, because here I am in this immigrant women, Black African women group, and they're trying to berate me and like completely ignore the information that I was giving them, because I'm gonna tell you why this is ironic, because they saw the sex thing. This is ironic because if they're immigrant women, I like I said to PJ earlier in a conversation, I bet you at least 1/3 of them had to sell sex. There's just no way, you know what I mean? And then the rest of them either came there on their own accord and didn't have to sell sex, like me. Surprisingly, I didn't have to sell sex to be in Germany. Well, not, you know, in that traditional idea way. And then the other ones are, you know, came here kind of working in a different way, where they come to try to find husbands. And a lot of them do, and are experiencing a lot of violence. And even if they're not experiencing the violence, they just want to leave the relationship as soon as they get the paper. So this was like I kind of wish I didn't leave now, because I kind of want to drag them. But anyway, this is a long story. But, you know, yes, to the Black solidarity, like we absolutely positively need it, because people definitely think because we're Black, like we're all buddy buddy. And listen, I'm still fighting to be taken seriously by a lot of Black spaces. And I've been doing this work for like 30 years. Okay, so I've been in sex work since I was 17. I'm not going to be 47, but it feels like it's been 30 years, right? So I've been doing it in an activism for about a decade, and I still can't even be taken seriously by a lot of Black people. I forget what the second point is, but I just wanted to say yes to that about, you know, Black solidarity needing to be more of a thing.
You know, I think you brought up a really good point when you said that sex work is like a microcosm of the bigger world. And I think that's like a really good way of framing why sex worker rights is so important. Like sex worker rights is about housing justice, is about disability justice, is about, you know, trans and LGBT justice, and is definitely about racial justice. And a lot of the most harmful oppressive dynamics that you see in the bigger world are magnified in the experiences of sex workers. And I wanted to sort of go into that a little deeper and calling out like racism and its role within the sex industry, especially like anti-Blackness in the sex industry. I remember going to Hong Kong with the Yellow Umbrella movement in like 2015, 2014 as a writer for Asian American Writers Workshop. And I had wanted to cover Hong Kong brothels, and remember just taking these photos of the sort of posters that are up with the prices of different sex workers. You had Russian sex workers on top, the most expensive. Then you had the Japanese sex workers, like slightly, less expensive. Then you had the Hong Kong sex workers, and then the mainland sex workers, because Hong Kong is closer to whiteness because of British colonialism, right? And then you have the Vietnamese, Thai sex workers, and at the bottom you have Indonesian, and then like Nigerian, and you have within sex work in clear price points the kinds of oppressions that we face in the larger society, right? And I think these are some of the reasons why it's so important to center sex workers in a lot of other movements. And it's also because I think sex workers get the brunt of it and are the black sheep of every movement that we're part of, even though we've been like funding everyone else's social justice movement for like time immemorial. But at the same time, I think as we do that, we need to also look at the dynamics within the sex industry, look at anti-Blackness within like Chinese, sex work, and like be sure that, we're constantly, like, as someone wrote in the chat room, like unmasking the sort of horizontal forms of oppression, with the understanding that sex workers, like, why it has been so hard to organize a sex worker rights movement is because we are being tasked with trying to undo all of society's oppressions at once, while we are like a group of often very traumatized people trying to come together, have a movement, change a campaign, change some laws. And at the same time, we have to address every single ism within our movement. We have to make sure that we do it right. And, and it can be challenging. When Aya had asked the question of which movement I'd like to see more alliance with, I've been recently reading a lot of Leah Lakshmi P.S.'s work on care work. And I think the disability justice movement is something that I'd love to see more intersection with and more conversation with, because within our organizing, we constantly see, the degree to which trauma, disability, mental health plays a role in all of our work, in our ability, in our relationships with each other, and how we hold care with each other. And also, why that so many of us are engaged in sex work to begin with. And I think, in order to challenge capitalism, in order to challenge these like precepts around our productivity that, determines our worth, we need to really think of disability justice and how to create a world that actually honors all bodies and all different forms of existing, regardless of how you're contributing to the bottom line of certain elites.
Yeah, I wanted, is it okay if I chime in?
Totally, yeah.
Okay. I'm not a main person, is that okay? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a sex noir, and I'm a sex worker activist as well. But I just wanted to chime in as far as like solidarity and anti-Blackness. I am a sex technologist by trade and the vice president of the Women of Sex Technology, as well as part of Hacking Hustling and a few other smorgasbord of things. And I feel that like part of division that happens within our community does take place in digital space because of the hierarchy and how that displays out through social media as well as advertising platforms. We've seen just recently, City Guy go down, we've seen Backpage go down, so it's a clear attack on certain types and people who participate in digital sex work, and also the accessibility of digital sex work throughout the community as far as street-based workers, or just not having access to the technology to be able to navigate it. One of my main goals is tech equity for sex workers, and I think that there's a lot of space and room for more solidarity from the platforms that are using our emotional labor, our likeness, and just our straight up impact on the culture to build up their platforms, build up their business without ever saying decrim, without ever, giving us the ways to be better. So there's platforms like Slixa, which is great. Kate Diamo does their blog, and like they've made political stances, but like there's a lot of room for these other platforms that absolutely benefit off the labor of sex workers to really step up and speak more to the betterment of the people on their platforms, and not just at historically, the patriarchal misogyny that exists within digital space, skimming off the backs of femmes making their money. So I think that's just something that I like to listen to you all of what's happening in physical space, because often what's happening in physical space, because of the people who are creating digital space, it's echoed within digital space, right? So the white men are creating the laws that are happening in physical space, they're doing the same thing in digital space. And so it's important that within the sex tech industry, and I'm speaking more toward like the entertainment industry as of now, because that's where I'm seeing sex workers being used and exploited. It's concerning. It's concerning because what happens when technology is able to access those people at the margins? Are there structures in place where they are not actively exploited in another area of life as well? And then when we talk about organizing around it, it's difficult because we're shadow banned. If I tweet out something, say, hey, can I organize this? It doesn't even go out unless you're actively following me. So I do encourage everyone to, if you see or hear someone who's talking about something interesting, ask what their Instagram is, ask what their Twitter is, follow them actively. Because otherwise they may be shadow banned. You may never see what they're talking about. And these are just the other defenses and ways that we have to practice privacy and security in digital space as not only a marginalized group, but those who are most of the time morally deemed as something wrong, right? And so, yeah, okay, thanks. Stepping down.
Yeah, thank you. And we have about 5 more minutes in the scheduled time that we put forth. And so if anyone wants to just, share any thoughts that have been kind of burning throughout the talk, or any last questions, now would be a great time. But we can also go a little bit longer if folks are down. But, we did say 90 minutes, so if people need to step off, that is cool.
Well, I'm awake now.
Can I say something?
Go for it, yeah.
Hi, my name is B. I'm originally from the States, but I immigrated to New Zealand several years ago. And I am both a sex worker and activist here. And New Zealand has been quite interesting, in which we do have decrim, and we've lived with decrim for quite a long time. The one thing that I notice that's very unique, or not unique, but interesting in New Zealand is you're not allowed to do sex work unless you're a citizen or permanent resident. So it like very explicitly and racistly attacks migrant sex workers. And I'm curious if anybody has any suggestions or comments on how to make sure that you are not forming solidarity with the wrong groups and people, because has been really shocking to me how easily kind of carceral feminism slips in there, particularly under COVID. So you're always allowed to do sex work in New Zealand, but we had 4 weeks of very strict lockdown in which all forms of in-person sex work were illegal. And already, document privileged sex workers in New Zealand do occasionally report migrant workers, which is horrifying enough. But then I saw a lot of people on Twitter sort of almost bragging or like noting about like dobbing in potential clients to the like police hotline that was set up like during lockdown, because nobody was supposed to be doing it. And it was just really fascinating to me how like instantly so many of these sex workers found solidarity with cops. And it's one of those things where I don't quite know how to, if anybody has experience with addressing that within your own movements when certain more privileged sex workers see decrim as being, oh, the cops protect us now, instead of being an anti-police movement.
Can I just, okay, because I'm looking, I have my phone on and the Facebook, so this is like a mind fuck right now because Facebook is like 10 seconds behind. All right, so I remembered what I was going to say earlier, and it kind of comes back into this. So firstly, I want to say Tamika Mallory, I think, is the first activist, and I was very surprised. Black women are always doing this work. Don't even get me started. That actually mentioned in a recent appearance that you cannot do this work without the strippers, and you can't do this work without the hustlers, right? So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that a Black woman, a Black activist, on some level centered sex workers and centered, you know, other Black people who are not usually a part of the conversation. And to kind of go into responding to this, you know, when you're trying to make sure you're not working with these organizations that are trifling, for lack of a better term, you really got, it's a lot of research, right? Because you've got to find these organizations that are super grassroots and really we don't play with, we don't really like to mix with these other groups that kind of have like this really elitist kind of mindset in how they operate, right? And it's not easy to find that because like for me, for instance, BSWC and a lot of our coalition members, like there's just certain things that we're just not doing, right? Like there's certain grants we're not applying for. We don't have time for that bullshit. You know, we don't necessarily like, I'm trying not to say names, like we don't necessarily want to like tag on to all the popular kids. And you know, like, and again, if you follow some of my social media pages, you will see me at any given time when they piss me off, just going the fuck off, because I actually just don't care. You know what I mean? Because I feel like they're not doing anything for us anyway. So why do I need to tag on to the popular kid when the popular kid is not making or breaking my situation, right? So it takes a lot of research to find out who these groups are, and a lot of interaction. It's really difficult. You know, like the situation in New Zealand, because I stopped there and I loved it. I personally loved it. You know, I spoke to Catherine, who runs the New Zealand Prostitute Collective, and did an interview with her and asked her what happened. You know, how did you end up like just screwing over the migrants? And basically what it was, like, they didn't give her time. Like they had a whole bunch of stuff in you know, in there that they were getting ready to put forth for the legislation. And at the last minute, they kind of sprung this on them, and she didn't really have a choice. Right? So this happens. How do I feel about Sean King? I'll answer you in just a minute. She didn't really have a choice. And this is, you know, this is what they do to you when you are these sex worker led spaces, or you're fighting for the rights of the people at the margins. They will spring stuff on you, and you had to make a snap decision. And that's kind of what it was. It was a snap decision. This is what she told me anyway. I mean, look, if her mother was in here, she probably wouldn't be trying to have this situation right now, but I think she lost the audio and ended up leaving the room, right? So they definitely do these kinds of things to people, but trying to connect with these groups is really, really tricky because we're not at the forefront. I mean, I'm trying to force my way in there. I'm trying to crawl. I'm trying to like kick people out of the way and whatnot. But it's not easy because we're not part of the popular group. And the kind of work that I do really stems from how I grew up. You know, I came from the gutter. I am a hood rat, straight up. I'm a little hood rat from Brooklyn. And that's really kind of how I operate with that kind of framework. We don't exclude anyone. So even though I am educated, I'm working on this is like my third degree. I'm working on my master's. When I create the spaces that I do for this movement, everyone's voice has to be included because you really cannot do this work without the people that are at the margins. There's just no way to do that. You know what I mean? Like, you've got to respect that there's a certain amount of intelligence and skill from these other people who may not be as formally educated as you that bring to the table. And there's a lot of talent and a lot of gifts that come from those communities. So That's my 2 cents on that. You know, I'm sure somebody else has a more eloquent response or a more tactical way of trying to be with those groups. And in regards to Sean King, you know, I don't really know nothing about that guy. I keep hearing stuff that he's done to Black women and how he steals from Black women, and I don't have an opinion on him. I think, you know, he doesn't really exist to me. That's all I gotta say about that.
I would like to also say something. Are we over time though? I don't want to.
So we'll go for 15 more minutes until about 9:45.
Okay, cool. So a couple things, like in response to what you said, B. I think for us, it's like policing as the institution is one thing, but also entrenched in us is like the concept of policing. We police people in different ways, in shape or form. So part of abolishing police is also a culture shift of unlearning policing. So that's like one thing. And to do that, we have to have a lot of deep political education in our spaces of like, yes, we're doing this work to like decriminalize sex work, abolish capitalism, abolish policing. And I think that's a lot of political education that has to be part of your coalition building and has to be a part of your work, because people need to understand like once we decriminalize sex work, the work isn't done. We still got to abolish police. We still got to abolish these systems of repression. So I think poly-ed is like one of the spaces of things that in BYP 100 we've taken up as a way to like really being collective with people and like being coalition of people to kind of help address those differences in ideologies. So that's like one thing. And something that came up in the chat around policy work and grassroots, and someone also named that Decream and Y is a good example. I would kind of say take lessons, but take it with a grain of salt from Decream and Y. So with Decream and Y, I think Decriminalize is a very privileged space in the sense that it's a lot of nonprofits. Yes, a lot of folks identify as sex workers have been in the trade, but it is still people who've been in the trade formally and are now in spaces of leadership within nonprofits. And there is a thing that we have to recognize with that of like the ways in which the privilege that exists within doing policy work, right? When we're trying to write this legislation, when we're trying to do lobby days, getting people who are currently in the trade required a lot of work. It required a lot of like money and resources to get people who are currently in the trade into those spaces. So there's a level of privilege that comes through doing policy work. And for sure, I think we should always center grassroots folks, but also recognizing the system doesn't work so that grassroots people could be able to move in the same pace as the policy process. That's just how it was set up, right? Like you'll have reporters the reporters were trying to get to you 24 hours a day. The policy process moves super fucking quickly. And when you have people who are doing their work at certain times that is not policy work, they can't engage in the policy process in a way that is meaningful and reflective of their experience, because it wasn't meant to center our personal experiences in that way. So I would say take the examples of decriminalize, but like recognizing that it's nonprofit-y a lot of kind of thing. Yeah, just wanted to name those two things.
And I also want to talk about a little bit about the migrant sex worker piece. So it's exactly happening the same thing. Even Canada have not fully decriminalized, but like but compare with the migrant sex worker, they have like lesser law to like regulate the local sex worker. So, but I think it's very important. So that's why Butterfly was formed and also organized the migrant sex worker to push back. So, and I think this is also, we need to also look at the society in the way how institution, how government can get the power by dividing the people, right? So, and I think that they are creating the illusion police is the solution. But then is not true. Just like in US, I'm not in US, but you can see US discriminate LGBT community, they discriminate the women, they discriminate Chinese people, but everyone votes for him, right? But why? It's like that is the successful, they divide us and then make us see other people as our enemy, but they don't see actually we are part of the people being oppressed. And I think this is so important that to support the migrant sex worker, if you think it's the migrant sex worker being left behind. So it's so important to support the migrant sex worker to get organized. Just like many folks also say, like we also need to in the movement include the Black sex workers. So so it's everyone's responsibility need to give the support, no matter funding. I hear the fundraising, and also create the space to support the Black sex worker, to voice out, to educate other sex workers. And I think this is so important. And racism, of course, is happened in sex worker community. As racism is happened in anti-migrant is also happened in the sex worker community, right? So I think that is something really need to support the people to organize, to push up, so push back. So decriminalization is not something can solve everything. There is still, we need to still address the anti-migration, the racism piece. So, but I think for many sex workers, it's still the very important step. So yeah, thank you.
I also wanted to touch on, since we have folks here from Hong Kong, from Toronto, Germany, Aquinos, and here, I want to like highlight, you know, the importance of organizing from a transnational lens. Like migrant sex workers' lives don't begin when they cross the border, and they don't begin as like second-class citizens. Sex workers have identities, you know, beyond, you know, when we become that marginalized status. And I think there's so much power in trying to see the entire and organize across borders, against borders, organizing against colonialism. One thing I think I learned in Canada that I thought was really like missing in some of our social justice language in the US is an emphasis on Indigenous rights, partially because the US has been so successful at genocide. Like we don't have as strong of an Indigenous rights movement, but going on with a very strong critique of, you know, Indigenous rights and colonialism, it comes together with migrant rights in this beautiful way, where you have like people marching together as immigrants and Indigenous folks to criticize the impacts of, you know, white settler colonialism, right? And I think one thing, I grew up in the projects in Spanish Harlem in New York, and I, you know, started sex work as a teenager, because, you know, my best friend at the time was also a sex worker, and, you know, I think growing up, I think felt like I had to identify either with Blackness or with whiteness. And if I had social justice ideas, I had to frame it either in terms of Blackness, you know, or take on like white liberal guilt, white vocabularies for understanding things only within the American historical context. And I think there's benefit in organizing transnationally also because it expands our vocabularies to look at the impact of colonialism and to look at ways in which we can create solidarities and the ways all of our labor has been like appropriated in these different ways. And yes, there is a huge like spectrum of differences in oppression, but also like these are also the concrete ways in which we can work together to challenge, you know, the history of white colonialism and where we are at this moment, where we have, you know, a global elite that is taking all of our resources, that is taking all of our labor, right? And it's very clear like which countries are the most marginalized and where the skin tone matches that marginalization, right? And I think, you know, as I'm struggling also like growing up, you know, in New York, you know, trying to do social justice organizing in different spaces, I think we are also struggling as a very new population in the United States that we were mostly brought in after 1968 due to the hard work of the civil rights movement, which opened up borders to a lot of Asians, right? I think, you know, we're still coming to terms with what it means to organize as Asian Americans, what it means to be Asian American, what a weird conglomeration, you know, what it means to organize transnationally, what it means to call out Chinese people for our racism, what it means to like look at, I think Lausan's done a good job of this, like the complexity of trying to translate Chinese activism to like American activism. Like my parents legit think that Black Lives Matter is being like funded by the Communist Party because they can only think of social justice in Chinese ways, right? It's either pro-communist or anti-communist. And if you're a lefty, then you must be pro-communist, and that's bad, you know? And so like, you know, everything gets lost in translation when we put all of our vocabularies also in one framework. And I think there's so much room for us to work together and to transcend and like look at where shared liberation is when we can actually talk to each other and work together.
May I ask for translation? 其實我哋都遇過一啲可能香港本地嘅性工作者係會都舉報一啲內地嚟香港暫時工作嘅性工作者嘅。 translate.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah. So, local sex workers in Hong Kong have tensions with sex workers coming from the mainland as well.
特別係喺香港而家一個對於中國內地移民好排外嘅氣氛下邊。
And there's this atmosphere of hostility toward new immigrants.
因為好多時就係好多香港人，特別係自從反送中啦，或者再之前嘅一啲針對中國政府嘅社會運動啦。
And because of these anti-government, sort of anti-extradition bill protests in Hong Kong,
好多時一啲內地嚟香港嘅移民就會俾好多本地人就視為可能係中國政府嘅一啲所謂嘅殖民啦。
So people confuse or they kind of portray mainland immigration or migrants as a kind of Chinese colonialism in Hong Kong.
所以當特別係香港越嚟越排外，越嚟越針對一啲新移民或者內地嚟香港嘅人嘅時候咧，係反而又會將一啲新移民或者內地嘅朋友係推咗去一個支持政府嘅嗰個範圍入邊咁樣。
And so this sort of xenophobia, this anti-migrant attitude in Hong Kong actually pushes a lot of new migrants and immigrants to a more pro-government position.
咁喺而家政治氣氛特別對立啦，即係支持政府同埋反政府一個好對立嘅氣氛下邊咧，其實係更加難達成到嗰一種本地或者係一啲外勞之間嘅團結嘅。
Right, and so that's really getting in the way of solidarity between local and mainland folks.
所以我覺得係要分清楚政府嘅嗰一啲政策，特別係中國政府對香港嘅政策，同埋一啲中國嚟香港嘅人。
So we need to differentiate between the Chinese government's policies and Chinese people who are coming to Hong Kong, two different things.
我諗香港嘅 context 同埋外地嘅 context 好唔同啦，即係始終係冇一啲好涉及到種族嘅一啲議題，反而更加多係呢一啲所謂嘅殖民身份嘅一啲問題啊。
The Hong Kong context is pretty different from overseas, where we're not talking as much about race per se, but talking a lot about these sort of colonialism-related problems.
咁所以我都冇辦法真係完全回應到，譬如加拿大一啲本地同埋外勞嘅問題。咁但係我覺得其中一個原因都係在乎於即係有一啲人係合法，同埋有一啲人係唔合法咁工作咯。
Sorry, say it again.
我覺得係當一啲人係一啲性工作者喺香港可能係合法工作嘅時候，咁可能佢就會特別針對一啲喺香港唔合法嘅工作嘅性工作者咯。
Right. So Hong Kong folks who are involved in legal work will often target folks who are doing, criminalized work.
咁點樣去說服一啲本身喺香港唔犯法嘅性工作者，都去支持埋一啲本身喺香港可能犯法嘅性工作者，就會一個好大嘅挑戰咯。
Right, and so it's a challenge of how to bridge that gap. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And we're just about at the end of our extended time, so I just wanted to thank everyone for sharing the space. I learned an incredible amount. I feel so grateful and indebted to all the folks who spoke and just everyone who attended. And we're going to send an email, I think, out to everyone who are RSVP'd, just so that we have a way of keeping the conversations going. And, this will be on our Facebook. This was streaming over Facebook Live. And really sorry that I wasn't able to get to every question that was asked in the chat. There were a lot of really, really good questions, but hopefully we'll have a way to keep talking digitally. And hopefully this won't be the last time that we all meet like this. So really, really thankful. And take care.